Hello, my name is Caleb Denby, and welcome back to Game Review, Game Review, Game Review, man, review me a game as fast as you can. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a game between Alexander Alekhine and Jose Raul Capablanca. This game, of course, in the World Championship match all the way back in 1927. In this game, Capablanca chose d4, the Alekhine responded d5. We have c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5 from Capablanca, knight bd7, your standard queen's gambit declined, e3 from white, defending this pawn now, the bishop outside the pawn chain. We have bishop e7, knight f3, castles, and rook c1 from white. The idea here is white is delaying the development of this bishop so as to avoid losing a tempo after d takes c4. Black chooses the move a6, which is a pretty common idea. And now generally these days, white captures on d5, not allowing d takes c4. And the reason for that is we'll see after a3, black simply captures, and while white gets to develop this bishop immediately, it's going to be forced back with the move b5. And this is what we see happen in the game. First though, black includes this move h6, bishop h4, and now we go in for the line I just showed. And after b5, for some reason here, Capablanca chose the e2 square for the bishop. I think honestly, d3 is just a better, more active square. Instead though, bishop e2, we see bishop b7, and we see castles from white, c5 from black, and now d takes c5. Of course, d takes c5 from white. Black captures with knight takes c5. Now simply knight d4. And what we have going on here is a very symmetrical pawn structure, actually. Of course, it's 4 versus 4 on the king's side, and 2 versus 2 on the queen's side. But black's pieces are simply better placed to handle this position. Knight d4 from white is actually not my favorite move from Capablanca. Black is now simply going to develop very naturally, bring his rooks to these files, and his pieces are simply better placed to handle this structure. The knights working together to control the e4 square, and we'll see some very instructive maneuvers from Alekhine shortly. First and foremost though, rooks to the open files. We see b4 from white, the knight retreats back to d7, and now the problem for white we'll see quite shortly. Bishop g3, kind of a weird move, just guarding some squares here. The problem for white is these knights are well placed to jump into the weakened squares on c4. White tries to play queen b3, keeping the knight out of c4, but black now simply continues with knight d5, and all of his pieces are coming to life. We see bishop f3, this bishop guarding against this diagonal. If white had just played pretty normally with a move like, I don't know, let's say rook d1, he would run into knight takes c3, rook takes c3, and now bishop d5. This is likely what Capablanca was trying to avoid with this move bishop d3, or bishop f3 rather. Instead though, the new problem with bishop f3 is it just totally gives up the c4 square. And now Alekhine makes great use of it to activate his pieces and win this game. Knight e4 was white's choice. Black simply supports this rook further with queen c8. We see rook takes c4, now knight takes c4, and black is the one with all of the activity. Rook c1 from white. Now the queen has served its purpose on c8. It jumps over to a8, putting more pressure along this long diagonal. White now brings this knight back to c3, finally challenging this knight on d5, but this turns out to be a pretty bad move. Rook c8 from black is perfectly fine, and after the trades, we have this position here, and it turns out black is simply dominating in this position. There's no way to stop the black pieces from invading here. White tried a4, but now after bishop f6, the knight jumps back to f3, and the black pieces are already invading. Note that if white tried to keep this diagonal closed, there's really no good way to do it. You can play a move like rook d1, but you're simply going to run into b takes a4, and after queen takes a4, knight b2. There's just no way to stop the black pieces from getting in. So knight f3, but this allows bishop b2. The black rook has to move. Of course, once again, if you come to d1, you run into some tactics. In this case, of course, the tactic is knight takes e3 defending the queen, attacking the rook, and attacking the white queen. Of course, after rook takes d5, you run into rook c1 check with back rank problems. And at the end of the day, black's going to be up a full pawn, and this pawn will not be long for this world either. So now the rook has to come to e1, and this is rather unfortunate for white. Simply rook d8, and black has control of the open files. Takes on b5, takes on b5, and now white tries to move h3, trying to solve some of these back rank problems, but Capablanca finally breaks through. He needs to get to this d2 square, and to do that, he has to get rid of this knight. So what does he do? He simply plays e5 with the idea of e4, removing this knight. Rook b1 was Capablanca's choice, but now e4 still comes on the board, and after knight d4, we see some clever tactics to finish off the game. Bishop takes d4, rook d1, and then of course the final move of the game, I'm sure you all see it at home, it's that same tactic we saw before. Knight takes e3, hitting this queen, and after a move like queen takes d5, you get hit with rook takes d5, and you cannot capture the knight back, or else you get checked. A very nice game from Alekhine, a very nice finishing move to end the game. No way to regain the piece for white. A very nice game from Alekhine, outplaying Capablanca, using the only open file on the board, blocking the other file with his knight, using the key c4 square. And with that, thank you very much for joining me on this episode of Game Review. My name is Caleb Denby, and I will see you next time.